It's been a polarizing week, at least according to my Facebook newsfeed. In the wake of President Obama's igniting the firestorm over who can and who can't use a bathroom in a public school, opinions and positions packed the Facebook newsfeed, and people both celebrated and complained about sincerely held religious beliefs and transgender rights. And we defaulted to our own automatic attitudinal responses. And we do that in neurological speeds that don't account for a suspension of bias or any tolerance for things that are unclear. Now, we aligned ourselves with primary certitudes about transgender people that have become increasingly cured, like hot cement that never had the pressure of a provisional footprint. We haven't been doing a good job at critical thinking. Primary certitudes drive our own automatic attitudinal responses. And we come by these in an interesting and pervasive process as a result of being raised in a strong content culture, where we get the same messages and values over and over, becoming so saturated with the content that we surrender any open mindedness. A long time ago, I took my kids to a funky amusement park, perhaps the strangest one in Southern California. It's called Legoland. And if you're a Lego maniac, this is Mecca. This is a place you want to go. My son Christopher was a huge Lego maniac, and we went there on one sunny Carlsbad morning, and his mom and his little sister had to go use the restroom, so Christopher and I waited outside that restroom for them to finish their stuff. And while we were waiting, we noticed another man and his little girl cross the walkway from where we were waiting. And the man happened to be a cigarette smoking man. Not necessarily that cigarette smoking man, but nonetheless, he was puffing away. And Christopher was alarmed by this guy. He's like, "Dad, let's go." I said, "Well, why?" And he grabs my hand and he tugs me away. I said, "Chris, what?" He goes, "That guy, he's smoking." Now, to be fair to Chris, this is the first time he's ever seen anybody smoking a cigarette in person, in real life, having grown up in the bubble that is St. George, Utah. So I took advantage of this moment. I said, and I was taken aback too by his association. This guy was bad because he's smoking a cigarette. And I said, "Okay, well let's watch him and see what he does. Let's see if we can prove your hypothesis of his being bad. This is the price you pay for having a professor as your father." So Christopher spied on the guy, and we watched as people walked by. He smoked a cigarette. He held his little girl's hand while he waited, I'm assuming, for his spouse. And I asked Chris after a little while, did you see him trip anybody? Did he pickpocket anybody's wallet? Did he slap his kid around? And Chris says, "No." So, well, then why is he a bad guy? He goes, "Well, because he's smoking." I said, "Okay, all right. You remember a couple weeks ago when you ate an entire bag of Chips Ahoy chocolate chip cookies?" And he goes, "Yeah." "And do you remember what happened after you ate those cookies?" And what happened was he threw them all up. It was horrible. And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, then you must be a bad person." He goes, "Well, no, I'm not." I said, "Yeah, you are. By your definition, by eating all those cookies and made you sick and then you threw up, then you must be a bad person." And Christopher looks at the cigarette smoking man. And the light goes on in his head. And he looks back at me and he goes, "Oh, he's not a bad guy. He's just smoking cigarettes." I said, "Yeah, buddy. He's just smoking cigarettes." That was a primary certitude that he had lodged in his brain from the cultural conditioning that we've all gone through. And there used to be a time when cultural conditioning about cigarette smoking was completely different. In a strong content culture that demonizes cigarette smoking through repetitive messages weekly in religious and cultural gatherings, that outcome leads to a relationship between smoking a cigarette and being bad. And that's how a primary certitude is built. Now, I grew up the same way, with the same cultural conditioning about people who smoke. But the primary certitude never cured in my brain because of the paradox I lived with, and that was my mom and dad. As parents do, they established a foundation for my moral compass. They built character in my brother and I and our sisters. They instilled in me the golden rule. They taught me tolerance all the while smoking cigarettes. There is no relationship between smoking and character. A strong content culture created that relationship through the force of repetition. And that became, for most of us, a primary certitude. And that's a barrier to critical thinking. Now, there's no relationship between smoking and character. But we've created relationships between other cultural concepts like divorce or the holidays or chastity or birth control or pork or alcohol or giving blood. And we've done that with charitable donations and going to Mass or taking the sacrament or reading the scriptures, except on these latter, the relationship is between good and those mentioned actions, where, again, we abandon a provisional perspective. We've all been surprised to find out that a church-going person did something contrary to what we think a church-going person should do. And that surprise is an effective result of our primary certitude, that barrier to critical thinking. A couple of behavioral tendencies grow out of cultural conditioning. One is hidden presumptions, beliefs that are so ingrained as fact that we do not believe they need to be proven at all. The other is ethnocentrism. It's the belief that our way of life or our culture is better than all others, the very conditioning from which stemmed the justification for whatever terrorist action happened this very morning. Hidden presumptions not only stem from primary certitude, they come from prejudice, they come from intolerance of ambiguity, and they come from defensiveness. Our own prejudices prohibit us from hearing new information or ideas that are different from our own predetermined standpoint. If messages are unclear or misunderstood or ambiguous, hidden presumption results in an intolerance of ambiguity. We have no patience with nor critical attention to the question at hand. We just default to a polarized, pre-critical position. And this results in the either-or fallacy, where there are only two sides to a given issue, where in fact there are many more ways to see that issue. Defensiveness comes from acting on little information, jumping to conclusions on insufficient evidence, and responding with our dukes up, ready to fight. Gosh, does that sound familiar? What all three of these have in common in sustaining our hidden presumptions is that they forbid or even extinguish our ability to critically think, that provisional perspective. Ethnocentrism is the result. If you're not with us, you're against us. Ethnocentrism is the single most divisive influence in any strong content culture. It's the reason our political process is in shambles. It's the reason faith has been replaced by certainty, which is a primary certitude. It's the reason why discrimination is justified. It's why the prestige of the appearance of morality prevails in the intolerance of ambiguity. It's the reason why we don't treat others with differing opinions as equal. Now, this is nothing new. It's just amplified now through channels of social media, traditional media, and that requires us to become more critical than ever, to create that 360-degree provisional perspective. That perspective, that open-mindedness, is cultivated through a practice of critical thinking. And that practice starts with considering the source of any position, the source of any evidence, of any argument to determine whether or not that source is a fact, or if it's an opinion, or if it's an assertion, or if it's a belief. Critical thinking identifies assumptions and presumptions, both your own and those of others. And we are so driven by assumptions. We make them so carelessly and so easily without really considering what kind of evidence is out there. And that just gets us into trouble. Critical thinking has the ability to defend more than one side of an argument. The provisional perspective asks questions. It experiments, it designs, it's creative and definitional, it's well informed, and it staves off conclusions until it's satisfied that all the evidence has been considered. And we haven't seen this in an awful long time. Creating a provisional perspective is a lot of work. The automatic attitudinal response isn't. It's just a default. It's a stereotype. It's something that we just default to. The provisional perspective takes time and care. It's considerate of others and their perspectives and their positions. It's also dangerous. Critical thinking is dangerous with enough power to jackhammer away at strong content cultural conditioning, leaving you with your own standpoint. If you have any questions, please feel free to post on the bottom of this post. Thanks for watching.